Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by three Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for Coffee and Conversation. Dr. Terry Barnett wants you to live like you're dying. With a doctorate in ministry, Dr. Barnett is an expert in end of life, and his research and experience show that America is getting it wrong. He is taking on our death-phobic culture with his 3 key secrets to dying well, which also happen to be the 3 key secrets to living well. His mission is to help people enjoy the benefits of a good life while living, end fear and anxiety about death, and in the last moments know that it was a life well lived. Dr. Barnett lights the way.
Well, welcome everybody. Well, I'm thrilled today to have a very good friend. I've known Dr. Terry Barnett for over a decade, right?
Yes, sir.
And I always considered him the designated driver in a group. You know, with the good judgment, the steady hand, the wisdom, all of that. And so more than ever, I think I know we're happy to have you here. And especially with this topic, this topic we're going to deal with. You know, no one's getting out of this life alive, you know, and it's part of living is the end point, the D word, dying. And as you've told me so many times, and I've heard you speak, that, you know, we'll talk about every aspect of life, perhaps, that this one seems to be just a door we just are very reluctant to open. I guess we understand it, but it doesn't make much sense when you see it as a continuum. So, again, I'm glad you're here. We've got some great questions for you, and I know you have good answers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Terry, so glad you're here. So,
thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, you've acknowledged so many times, and I think we all agree that we live in this death-phobic culture, and other cultures aren't death-phobic, but specific to us, according to the Centers for Disease Control, this blows my mind. 60% of people say that, you know, making sure their family is not burdened with tough end-of-life decisions is extremely important. Yet, 56% have not communicated their end-of-life wishes. So it's like we know it's important, but we still don't do it. So what do you think about that? What can be done to end this silence around death?
Teresa, that's a great question. And actually, I love those numbers because you're right. Although in the research I just finished, they're actually higher now. Yeah, amazingly, yes. But what do we do about this issue? You know, we celebrate everything otherwise in our relational dynamics, in our families, and in our life. Our birthdays many times are celebrated, our birth is celebrated, you know, anniversaries are celebrated, and so on and so on. But we seldom think about death. You know, we have celebrations in terms of celebration of life and so on after someone passes away to show our love and our, you know, concern and so on. But prior to that point, we aren't talking about this topic very often, very much. Not in our families, not sitting around the table. You know, we talk about it, the voices, you know, are getting louder because we have palliative care, we have hospice organizations, and they're all dealing with, you know, this final season of life for everyone. But in terms of our family structures and how we live our lives, it's not a topic that we talk about very often in our culture. And you're right, in other cultures, it's much more free to talk about. It isn't taboo. But interestingly, in our culture, we just don't bring it up much. And we need to. We should, because it's a very important moment in someone's life, obviously, the end of their life. And how they face it, and how they enter into it, and how they have talked with their family members, and vice versa, makes all the difference in the world in terms of how that individual will pass away from this life. Meaning, how are they going to feel inside? Are they going to have a sense of peace and a sense of readiness to make the transition or not? Now, at the end of the day, dying is hard. It's not, it's just a difficult process. And a lot of things make it more difficult than maybe it has to be. But if we don't work towards making sure everyone in our sphere of influence and the people that we love and care about understand what we want, then things can break down real fast once the process begins and that person is facing their last number of months, weeks of their life.
So the silence, you think, is part fear and part it's just uncomfortable to bring it up?
Yeah,
it's just more to it.
Well, not really. I mean, there's a lot of ancillary issues going on at this time of life for everyone. Pain management, the processing of a disease or continuation of it, if that's what's happening. I'm not really talking about accidental death. When that happens, it's sudden, and that's a little different, although we can be prepared for that as well, and we may talk about that. But approaching your death in terms of an illness, then we generally have time, to go through the processes that need to be accomplished to have a good death, meaning that we have a death that we are ready for as much as we can be. I'm not advocating that, oh my gosh, if I do all these few things, then, I'm not going to have any troubles at all. I'm not going to worry about anything. It's just going to be just simple. I'm not saying that at all. It's not easy. But there are things that we can do that help our emotional and mental and spiritual makeup to accept that our time on this earth is coming to an end and make it far easier for our family members. But it begins with a conversation, just a simple conversation to talk about it. And there are mechanisms to help us with that as well. But the essence of it is just that. We just need to talk about it more before it's intimate in our lives.
Well, I've heard you talk many times about this, and I've heard you talk about the three components of dying well.
Yes.
You've probably already touched on them, but could you be a little more specific about it?
I can. In the 2.5 years worth of research I did, which I just completed not too many months ago, it became extremely evident to me that there are three components in our human makeup that, if they are addressed and addressed well, make all the difference in the world on how we feel mentally and emotionally and even spiritually when we come to a season of life that our life is coming to an end. Forgiveness is one, reconciliation is two, and gratitude is a third. And we all know those words. It's almost like, you've heard of something hiding in plain sight. We've probably all heard that phrase. And that's really what is happening with these concepts. We all know about them. We all understand, or we think we understand what the words mean, but we don't, actually. We don't understand the depth of the power of forgiveness. Let me just speak to that for just a moment. So I'll give you an example. In one of the people that I interviewed in my research, they were a number of them, obviously, but this one is on my mind. She had just been estranged with her son for much of her adult life and into her senior years. They didn't talk much. They didn't have a whole lot of communication. And so there was a brokenness in the relationship. And as she realized that she's drawing close to her end of time on this in this life, it became a huge obstacle for her feeling like she's ready to go through this process. And it wasn't until they were able to get together and spend some time together and talk through some of their issues and realize what had been lost through all these years. There was a forgiveness that took place on both sides, and that led to reconciliation of the relationship, even in this late hour. And that made her feel a sense of gratitude toward her life. And when we have a sense of gratitude toward how we have lived our life, or at least how it's beginning to end, then we are much more emotionally and mentally and even spiritually ready to leave this life. So forgiveness is powerful, powerful tool. And there's a lot more to it, but for the sake of our show today, then that's probably as much as we can get into. Yes, go ahead.
You and I, luckily only you and I, and not Teresa and Danielle, at least I don't think so, have been at the deathbed of many people. And I've always been impressed that how the things that you value most tend to come out at that particular point.
Exactly.
Everything else is just noise, garbage. Right. And it's always about relationships. So I'm not at all surprised to hear about forgiveness, reconciliation, gratitude, all things that have to do with our human interaction. And right. It's not a surprise, but it's it's powerful to hear.
Right. It's not a surprise. And that's why I often say it's like these are hiding in plain sight. We understand, or we've heard these words. We've probably heard, read books about it and the power of forgiveness. We hear in all kinds of stories. But these concepts, what happens at the end of life is they get exacerbated. And when there is unforgiveness in relationships, important relationships in our lives, as we're facing our own death, then they are just they're magnified 1,000 times. And there's no way to feel like I'm ready for whatever's next. We don't feel that way when we have such unfinished business here and now. And it needs to be fixed, but that is a difficult process for many, many people.
Let's start earlier, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, the whole.
Do it now.
I have a whole chapter in my book that deals with if you want to die well, you should live well. Right? Don't have broken relationships. Don't have anger and bitterness and those kinds of confusion in your emotions and your makeup, because and what happens, we go through life, we have those kinds of relationships and issues, we put them on the back burner because we're dealing with life, we're dealing with everything else, whatever stage of life you might be in, and we don't think about them all that often, possibly even important relationships that are broken. But when you get to this season of life that we're talking about, when life is coming to an end, they become extremely important.
So you mentioned the unfinished business, and you gave us some very specific examples. Have you met with people who have high anxiety from some other issues, or is it always these three, or do you find other things come up?
No, and I don't want to make it too simple, Danielle. Thank you. There's a lot of ancillary issues when you're facing, the last season of your life. Pain management is huge. If pain is not controlled, it's hard to deal with anything else, as you can imagine. So that's part of this process. And there's medication management and just the management of how you're living your life during this time as well. That's important, obviously. So there are a number of things that come into play when we're in this season of life. And when I say season of life, I'm really talking about 6 months. You got 6 months left to live, 6 months to 12. Probably, much more than that, and you still might be going through life in more of a normal, process. But when it gets down to these number of single-digit months that you have left, and that you have that left, then these issues become very, very important. They are the three that really guide us, I think, guide our emotional makeup, our mental makeup, and certainly our spiritual makeup. And so they become very, very important. And if all the rest are managed pretty well, the other issues that we are facing during this moment are managed reasonably well, then these are the three that really need to be focused on. Well, the forgiveness and reconciliation, those are the two that lead a person to a sense of gratitude about their life. If they don't have a sense of thankfulness for what their life has been, and the legacy that they're leaving, then it's very difficult to leave it. You don't want to leave it because you're not ready.
Yeah, that's powerful, powerful. And to be able to be at someone's bedside takes courage. Not everybody can do that. So I'm curious how it's changed you as a person, like from going through these experiences.
It's done a couple of things, Danielle. One, it's made me very aware of my own mortality. When my mother became sick about 13 years ago or so now, she had a double mastectomy over about a 10-year period of time, and the cancer came back, and it wasn't, without minimizing it, it was the most extraordinary experience I think I've ever had in terms of bedside moments. One, I'm sure because she was my mother, but I was with her continuously. She actually passed away in my arms. And we had a chance to talk and engage with each other the last 3 or 4 months of her life. And it was the most wonderful time. So when she actually passed, I wasn't guilt-ridden. I had a tremendous sense of loss, but I was happy for her because I believed that she was no longer, suffering and no longer in pain. And I could be okay with that. So not only dying well affects the person that's about to pass, but it also profoundly affects family members because it puts them at peace when peace is a very difficult thing to find in those moments. So that was really my first, and what it reminded me of was, we're all going to die. We're all going to go through this. We don't, like Roger said, we don't get out of it. We're gonna face it. And I think it was at that moment probably that I determined to myself that I wanted to face it well.
Well, Terry, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
So I didn't want a lot of broken relationships in my life. I didn't want to have a lot of anger and bitterness about my failures or my, any other things that maybe didn't go my way. That's just kind of life. But it has a lot to do with how we look at it. And sometimes it takes a conscious effort to look at it. Maybe something happened over here that set me back and I didn't like it and it was a miserable experience, but I don't have to live there. I can move forward and maybe, just maybe, with enough time, I might learn something from that experience as well. So it has a lot to do with how we are willing to face moving forward in our life. And that usually will develop a sense of gratitude about life. If these other things are in, in the way they should be in one's life.
Well, you've been alluding to this, but with all the suffering and all the things that one must face as one is approaching the end of their life, there's the family that is also facing huge things. Family, friends, the surrounding. Teresa knows this very well. She is a coach, and she has a great number of widows that she coaches, and so she's learning more every day. She gets smarter every day. Danielle too. I'll tell you, and so I do by osmosis. But we have to think about them also. When I was in the military, I was assigned to a fighter squadron, and we would lose people, and we had a ritual that it was a sudden death, of course, but we'd have a ritual, and we'd all pour a drink in a shot, and we would all toast them together, and then we would break the glasses against the stone wall or fireplace or something. And I have to say, it was comforting. It really helped. And I can't very honestly say why. But so the question is, what can we do to ease the way for those, our loved ones, who have to move on without us in spite of great grief?
Right. I think hearing your story about celebrating the life and the death of a colleague when you were in the service, breaking that glass was, I think, moving forward with a sense of closure in a way, or at least in part of that process. And that's very important. And if you, the more peace there is surrounding this process for everyone, whether it's the person that is terminally ill and is going to pass away, or the family, friends, whoever's important in the relationship, if they don't find a way to capture a sense of closure, then, everything stays in turmoil. It's very, very difficult, and there is no peace. And the people left behind have to struggle with, I wish I had done this. I wish I'd have said this. I feel terrible about myself because I didn't, do this better. Let me give you a personal example, if I may. I'll make it quick. For about 10 years, I carried, and this is a long time ago now, but a deep sense of guilt and shame in my life because of the way my father passed away. Now, I shared with you how my mother passed away, and it was an amazing moment, even in the midst of death. My father, however, was just the opposite. I was a younger man at the time, and I had just finished my studies at Oregon State, and I was moving to Hawaii, and I was so wrapped up in that, in my self-centeredness about the excitement of that I did something very, very badly. And what I did was this. My father had a stroke on vacation with my mother in Portland, Oregon, or in that region. And he spent a number of days in the VA hospital up there and had to be released from there. So I brought him down here to skilled nursing in Visalia, actually, town in California. And because I was so wrapped up in myself, when I got into this facility, I took him, and I remember clearly he was in a wheelchair, walked him into the front doors, and they, of course, opened up, and I met a receptionist, and I think someone then came out from a nurse or CNA or someone, and they took him, and they just wheeled him off. And I'm not even sure I said, I must have, God help me, I must have said goodbye, but I can't remember. But I basically just turned around and walked out the door and went on with my life, because the next day I was moving to Hawaii. And you know what happens, right? You can see this coming. 6 months, he dies. He dies there. I wasn't there. I didn't see him. I didn't see him through that whole time. And for the next 10 years, at least, I was just absolutely the worst son that I could imagine. And I was so ashamed of myself. And so how we end our relationships matters. It matters deeply. And maybe you won't think it's going to matter at the moment. But if you're the one left behind, you give it enough time, and I can almost assure you at some point it's going to matter to you. And you're going to wish that you had done things differently if you could have.
So it sounds like forgiveness includes oneself.
Oh,
others.
Absolutely, Teresa. That's a whole nother aspect of it. Yes. Forgiveness runs in a lot of different directions. It runs to other people from us. It runs back to us from other people. It runs to ourselves. We forgive ourselves. We have to forgive ourselves. And then if you're a person of faith, there's God's forgiveness. So this forgiveness concept is very, very important.
Well, this is powerful indeed. Words to live, die, and grieve by.
Indeed.
It touches all of us, Terry, and we're so deeply grateful for you being here. Want you to hurry up and finish that book. I know that takes a long time, and it's a journey, but we're all going to be waiting for it. But I know that more people would love to hear you speak, and I think we should facilitate that, huh, Danielle?
For those interested in contacting Dr. Terry Barnett for speaking engagements, email us at info@mymasterpieceliving.com. We'll also have his social media handle and some other email addresses listed in the description of this podcast episode. Thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.